Hey! Hello, my friends. How are you all today? Hope you're having a fantastic Tuesday. I had to think there for a second. Have a quick look at the screen here. We got Windsor, Colorado, Alberta, Canada, UK, Wales, Indiana, Vienna. Wow. Denver, Colorado, another Indiana there. Germany, Cologne, Germany. Lots of Germans. Guten Tag. Today we're going to be talking about modes. Pretty scary. And even more scary, we're going to be talking about modes in a blues, which is particularly inappropriate, really. But it is a kind of a useful thing, and it's something that I think a lot of people worry about more than they should. They think it's more difficult than it actually really is. And a lot of times you can do it in ways that are relatively simple. In fact, some of you as we go along might be like, actually, I'm already doing that. So you might already be using modes. You're just not familiar with the big scary words. Just give me 1 second here. There's some strange person on my screen there, Richard, if we could. I don't know what's going on there. We got Bert come along on the screen there. We've got some video of Bert tuning up. How you doing, Bert? How did that happen? I'm not exactly sure. that makes for an interesting start to the show. How are you, Bert? Are you well? Can you hear me? Yes, with the white strat there. Richard, I don't know what's going on. Richard, the moderator, is.
I have muted him.
There we go. That makes for a great start to the show. Hey, super slick, us lot. We're super slick. Anyway, let's get into the nitty gritty bit and start talking a little bit about scales and blues and all of that sort of stuff. If you've joined me for any of these classes before, I'm sure you're familiar with the basic ideas of the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic, probably a little bit of the blues scale. And I'm hoping that most of you have heard before me rant about how important it is to learn licks. If you're playing a blues, particularly with blues, you don't want to be playing scales up and down because it just doesn't sound very good, right? So just put together, see if I can get a little loop here on a little shuffle. Is that looping all right? Close enough for jazz. So let's have a little look-see here. Sorry, I've got the wrong screen up, so I want to check I'm in focus. Here we go. So if we go... like, it's just not really happening, is it? Like, it's not bad, like the notes are okay and it's all right, but it's not really saying anything. So the key feature, just for those that have missed any of this, you've got to learn some licks. If you're going to learn blues, you need to let the listener know that you're speaking the language of blues, and we do that by learning licks, which come from a scale. You could say that the scale is the alphabet, so we're playing the words. So we might go... for example. So there I was just used a couple of licks, but straight away, hopefully, you went, oh yeah, he's talking blues. We're hip with that. Now, where a lot of the confusion comes, where people start thinking, oh, well, I'm going to start playing some modes. I'm going to use the Dorian mode, right? They go, right, the Dorian mode, that's A Dorian. What's the parent major scale for that? Who knows what the parent major scale is for A Dorian? Chuck it in the comments down there. I'm sorry, I'm pointing down here. That's probably not where your comments are, right? But my screen's here. Okay, so we've got D has said it's G major. That's okay. So hopefully, most of you, if you don't know already, the key of the Dorian mode is the second mode of the key of G. So if we play a G major scale over a G major chord, we would name that G Ionian or G major. It's the same thing. If we play it over an A, if we play the G major scale, but the tonal center is A, then we would name it A Dorian. Okay, it's as simple as that, but it's still G major scale. So what should we try? I'm going to take you through it now. I'm going to play the G major scale over my little A shuffle, and let's have a little think about if we feel like that's working in a bluesy kind of a way. So let's I'm going to use let's get to a close up here. So I'm going to use G major scale pattern 1. hoping most of you are familiar with that. So here we go. Let's play our A blues using the G major scale and see what happens. Yeah, something's not really going right there, is it? But I'm sure that I said at the beginning that we could use the A Dorian mode over the, and it would sound cool. That didn't sound very cool. I didn't play any wrong notes. I should apologize too a little bit for the sync issue. I'm very aware that as I play a little bit faster, that the note is coming a little bit earlier than the hand. It's just because in order to plug in the hat mic and the amps and stuff like that, it goes through some processing there, and I haven't yet figured out a way to do it. I know I should have done it for ages, but most of you hopefully know I've been busy in babyland for the last little while. So, but it's on my to-do list. I'll figure that out soon. Anyway, so who knows what the problem was? Can anyone put in the comments there? So what was going on there? Why? I promise you that you can play the A Dorian mode over. Use it over that 12-bar blues and make it sound good. But something was wrong. And what is it? Okay. So Andy's got it there straight away. Using G as the tonal center instead of A. Right? So if you're thinking modally, if you're thinking of using the A Dorian mode, you need to be thinking A Dorian, not G major. The notes are the same. The notes are exactly the same. But if you think about G and you target the sounds that would work in G, it doesn't sound good over the A. You have to think A, and that's, in essence, that's the whole point of modes, is learning that, hey, we're using the G major scale, but I'm thinking A. A is what's going on in my head. Now, it's possible to do it there in using that. In fact, I'll just show you just to make the point of it. So I'm still going to use these notes. It's going to sound a little different though. So I'm still using, that's the notes that I'm using. The dots are the same. I forgot to go to close up. Some funky things going on today, Richard. Sam's on the screen now. And I could hear his audio coming through for a second. So how do I fix that? How do I, if I notice that, how do I put my spotlight?
I have muted Sam now.
Okay. How do I spotlight me again? Sorry. It's all about me. The show's me. We have to see what I'm doing. What's going on? Now I've got you, Richard. How do I? There we go. Hey, I'm back. Hello. I was here all along. Hopefully you start to get the idea, like, oh yeah, okay, it can, by changing my headspace, by changing the notes I land on, it can make a difference. But actually, more importantly, and the thing that wouldn't be so immediately obvious, is that it's licks. I've got licks that work in each of the patterns of the major scale around the neck in each different mode. So when I start to think in A, again, where I'm thinking of those, I am thinking of like a different harmonic center, but I'm more thinking about licks that I know within each framework. I call them frameworks, each pattern shape. So, and a really easy way to deal with this is to start playing G major scale around the minor pentatonic that you're more familiar with. Okay, so pattern 2 of the major scale. Back to my close-up over here. I need to get, Joe Robinson uses his toes to change his cameras. I need to learn how to do that. So here's G major scale pattern 1. If you go to pattern 2, using a 3-note per string thing, or stay in position, whatever. There's the root note, the G. But we can easily think, okay, so we're thinking A. So it's still the easiest thing. There's minor pentatonic, look. We add that note in. There's the B again, the octave of that. And notice that I'm using my first finger to drop back to those if I want them. Now if we use our little pattern here, and that's using the Dorian mode. So I'm using the G major scale over the A, and this works for the whole blues. I've just only put that first chord in just to demonstrate this stuff nice and clearly. In a second I'll go through and record a little backing track of the whole 12-bar blues, because there's some other points to be made here. But the key thing, the thing to understand is that using the modes is about the notes that form around a tonal center, not the parent major scale. So you never want to think in terms of G major. You always want to think in A Dorian, and ideally you want to have some licks that use those notes. So again, like if any of you have been around and doing any of my courses where I teach the blues scale, I don't recommend practicing the blues scale up and down. I spent hours and hours of my life running a blues scale up and down, only to realize that it doesn't really sound very good when you run it up and down. Often the fingerings are pretty awkward in patterns 2 and 3. Reaching the blue note can be quite awkward, and you don't play it like that. You just want to be adding that blue note a little bit into some licks. So it's much better to learn a few licks that use the blue note. So if you wanted to get into, say, exploring some Dorian things, the really easy, obvious ones to get into would be, instead of thinking in minor pentatonic like this, just to think this, just straight down the 7th fret. So these middle 2 or middle 3 strings, middle 2 strings plus the lower one, sorry, I need to get that pedantry out, but those thinnest 2 strings, which are normally the 8th fret, you can just play around with this and think of some licks. Just think of like a little lick like that. It's a Dorian lick. It's this. Now, that particular lick is a really great example because it's a bona fide kind of a blues lick that you can use. It sounds kind of hip, a little bit more interesting than minor pentatonic for those people that are feeling kind of trapped by the cage and keep on playing minor pentatonic licks all the time and looking for some licks that are a bit outside the box. That kind of lick is a really good example because it's using this Dorian mode notes. It sounds a little bit hipper, but you don't have to think of it like that. It is the Dorian mode. You could choose to think of it like that, but most times there's not a necessity to. It's just a lick. It's a phrase that I know works, and for me, I feel like it makes more sense if I'm trying to express an idea or a concept to be programming my musical imagination with a whole bunch of different licks, and then hopefully in that kind of flow state when things are really happening, my musical imagination will draw out the correct phrases and licks. I have to think about whether it's a Dorian lick or a blues lick or a blues scale lick or a mixolydian or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just a phrase, a lick that my musical imagination hears. So I feel like that's a more solid approach, a more musical approach than trying to run scales or trying to get all complicated. But that's coming from somebody who's been doing this for rather a long time now, and I've gone through the stage where I wanted to play lots of notes and do all of the show-offy stuff, right? And that's not to say those things are invalid, because when I was a teenager, if you asked me to play on a blues, I'd be playing like as many notes as possible because that was just what I was into and what you do when you're a teenager and or 20s or whatever. You've got all this energy that you want to get rid of, right? Well, that's how it felt for me. So that is one time where learning the full scale patterns kind of make a little bit more sense, because you're not so much thinking of target tones and highlighting things. I'm thinking in terms of like, I'm going to try and do a little demo on it, but I haven't played this sort of style for so many years, so I'm going to put this little precursor up at the beginning. But like the Joe Satriani kind of legato things, which I used to be able to do like 25 years ago or 30 years ago, these little patterns that, those kind of things, I'll go to a close up again and show it. So we're using the G major scale. Yeah. Those kind of things, which, like, it's inappropriate for the blues, but I'm not very good at it. It's not my bag. I'm stepping way out of my lane there. But you get the idea that in those kind of, if you want to play that kind of rock, very notey kind of a thing, then learning the scale shapes and being able to link the scale shapes and knowing which scale pattern will work is pretty important. So there is a certain, and to be honest, when I'm doing that kind of thing, I'm still aware that I'm in A, of course, but it's the patterns are the patterns that I learned or I taught my fingers G major scale. I didn't relearn them all with a different modal thing, because things are flying by so fast, and the way you change between patterns, the way you link them together, there's only so many options, and I never found a way that made sense to rethink of everything for each different mode. So that's one example where thinking in terms of the major scale patterns maybe makes a little bit of sense and it's a little bit more valid. But most times, and again, we're blurring the line here, because I'm not sure I would call Joe Satriani a blues guitar player. He can play blues. Matt, the guy's like one of the best guitar players that's ever lived. But he's more of a rock guitar player to me that's been influenced by the blues. So those kind of lines maybe fit more into the rock thing, like a rock guitar player approach to looking at scales and looking at modes. Strictly blues things, I always tend to think it's more important the vocabulary. So even what I'd call contemporary blues artists, the blues artists that are pushing the boundaries, pushing the vocabulary of the blues. So I'd be talking like Robben Ford or Larry Carlton, Scott Henderson when he's in a bluesy mood. Josh Smith, they're still kind of traditional kind of blues players. They use the vocabulary of the great masters of Albert King and B.B. King and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and that's the basis of the vocabulary. But they push it out a little bit further. But they're still using vocabulary-based ideas, even when if anything, they're drawing on a little bit of jazz maybe. But it's still phrases and melodic ideas, not just running scales up and down. Does that make sense? And let's take a few questions about this idea. So the concept is, if you want to play the Dorian mode in a blues, so in the key of A, we're going to use an A Dorian mode. We know that the notes are the same as G major, but we're better off just thinking of our regular minor pentatonic licks and adding in these couple of notes. Because remember I will look at the question in just a second, but look at the questions in just a second, in case I said notes. The minor pentatonic has 5 notes, right? The pentatonic 5-note scale. When you look at the major scale, it's only got 7 notes. So we're only adding 2 notes in. In the key of A, if we're playing an A minor pentatonic scale, the 2 notes that we add to the minor pentatonic are the notes B and F sharp. If we add a B and an F sharp, then straight away we've got we could call it or say that we're playing the Dorian mode. Really, we're just playing the minor pentatonic. We added a B and or an F sharp, right? So you can think of it in terms of that as well. Okay. Any questions so far, either for you? Oh, just on the interaction stuff, I will try and look at my questions here sometimes. But there's a questions box which you can type your questions in, which will go to Richard, who's moderating. Hi, Richard. Thank you. And periodically I'll ask him if there's any important questions that have come up or common questions. So that's usually a better place for questions. Like right now I'm looking at the general chat though. So Richard, if there's any questions, chime in now. Otherwise I'm going to look at my no, he's answering other questions. Yes, adding the notes. He never thought of it as a mode before, but playing lots of these major gives a similar thing. Yeah, okay. So thinking of it in terms of the adding those 2 notes, the note B and the note F sharp, are also the 2 kind of really important players if you play the major pentatonic scale. So sometimes when people see that B and the F sharp in there, they mistakenly think that, oh, we've switched to the major pentatonic. So it would be a matter of exploring the greater context to make a decision if it did in fact move to the major pentatonic, or whether in fact it was the Dorian mode. So, and some of that would be, you could debate it. I've had heated discussions in pubs over beers before about whether a particular phrase or a solo is more based around an arpeggio or a scale, or what scale it is. So it's subjective. You can form your own opinion on it. Okay. John says, I don't see the point of learning modes. Use your ear and the licks you have learned and have fun keeping sweet spots of the chord in mind. I agree, John. And I think that if you just want to play blues, having some understanding of where these extra notes are can be interesting and helpful, but you don't need it. And I'm sure a lot of the greatest blues guitar players haven't dug into all of the harmony and theory behind modes. Where we're going to go to next with the Mixolydian thing, that becomes a little bit more important to get into the theory and how it works. It's a bit more of a jazz thing, and jazz is very much, if you want to play jazz, you need to get your head under the theory hood a little bit and understand how it all works. Otherwise it'll be pretty difficult. There are jazz guitar players that don't know how it works, but that's rare. Okay, yeah, if it sounds good, it is good, and that is what it all boils down to. So what I want to do now is take it to the next level up and start playing this same Dorian notes over the whole 12-bar blues, because so far I've only been just playing it over the A. So just give me a second to do, have a think if you've got any questions. So I've got to just reset my looper here for a second. I'm just going to play... Yeah, do it like this. Okay, so... Little quick change blues using all dominant chords. I always find with these things when I'm trying to talk, I always end up rushing a bit, so I'm trying desperately hard not to rush, but I probably will anyway. In fact, I'm sure I've rushed over anyway. We'll survive, won't we? You'll forgive me, I hope. That's not too bad. So now we got our Dorian mode. Let me get to that close up here. So. So you can see, hopefully, that all of those notes for that Dorian mode, with the A Dorian mode, work over all of the notes for the 12-bar blues. I was really trying to be quite strict about not doing anything too much else. I think I might have touched on a blue note or something. Hello, Six. You want to come and say hello? Come. Up. Up. There we go. Hello. Say hello to the people, good people of the internet. Yeah. She's desperate to go outside. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Maybe she spotted a fox or something. Anyways, you're going to have to stay in now because I'm doing a show. And if I can't let you out, then that's just too bad. She's a bit smelly too. Okay, what have you been doing? Rolling around in fox poo again, probably. So, I think this stage of figuring out that there's these extra notes around is an important step in exploring the blues vocabulary a bit further if you want to start exploring things on your own and trying to shift language that you've learned a little bit farther and trying to just see where things go. I know John made a comment earlier about he's not sure he sees the point of learning modes, and I get it. It makes sense, but I do feel like even though the vocabulary should be the central theme of things that you play because it's the language and it's the way you communicate, if you understand what's going on around it, if you understand how you can change things, it makes a little bit more sense to explore it. And a good example of that might be pattern 2. So if we're playing a blues up here and we're in pattern 2, so there's the root note, this one. Okay, so pattern 2 of the minor pentatonic, you all know here. Now, the G major scale around here but again, if I try and play that, it's not really going to work. But what you can do, like I'm just thinking, here's the minor pentatonic, but there's these other 2 notes, those same 2 that we had here, are there now. So you might have something where you go like, here. So what I was trying to do there was use a kind of a standard kind of a blues, but step, allow myself to step back to that note that I knew was a kind of a valid Dorian note. And that, at that point, I'm not really playing the lick anymore. I'm not containing myself to a lick or a phrase that I've certainly played before. I'm trying to feel around the outside of it a little bit. And this is where it definitely gets into slightly more advanced territory, because I think it's much more important to learn a good vocabulary and be able to express yourself with a blues vocabulary. But I often mention that the place where the blues language thing falls apart a bit is that you can muck around with the words a little bit and it still makes musical sense. Whereas if you took a word like run and you just said, well, what if I put an I at the front of it and it was iron? It doesn't make any sense anymore. It's not really a word. Whereas with the blues language or musical language, you can muck around with stuff, and sometimes you just find things that sound really cool. It's almost like making up a nonsense word, right? A word that doesn't actually mean anything, but it's. I'm clutching at straws here for a decent analogy, but I'm hoping that you get the idea. So I do think that there is benefit to understanding the bigger picture and exploring modes like that. As far as the notes in each of the patterns go, and learning licks that use them, but as well just having them as options that you might want to muck around with a little bit on your own. I just thought actually another really good one that I used to use. I play this style much anymore, but in my kind of rock days, doing these kind of licks like kind of AC/DC things, if you know that those two notes are valid for the Dorian mode, you can go. Or mix them. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter. You can, both of those things are valid options. And because your awareness, your understanding of these extra notes is there, once you've learned that first lick, you can go, hey, I'm going to try doing this. And sometimes it'll sound great and sometimes it won't. And that's okay because you tried it and you did something new and fresh and creative. And that can help keep you inspired to keep playing. If you're just playing the same things all the time, well, something else has gone really crazy again. Richard, Wayne has started sharing his whiteboard with me. So this is a bit weird, Richard. Can you make that go away? I'm really sorry, everyone. I don't know what setting has been set.
I can't see where Wayne is either. So I don't know why or how he's doing what he's doing.
There we go. I've got it back. Okay, we need to. There's must be some setting that's been left off here, Richard. So we need to have a chat with Fanny and find out why people can spotlight themselves. Okay. So where was I? I was on modes in different positions. It's back to normal. Yeah, just minimize it. ACDC. I'm not sure ACD. Sorry, I've just seen John's comment here about ACDC. We'll get back to Akadaka a little bit later, probably. But anyway, need to make it so only the host can share screen and unmute chats. Yeah, I think it's something like that. Richard, if you could have a quick look at the settings here, if there's anything that could be changed during the show, that would be grand. I mean, we're most of the way through now. Anyway, but okay. Do we have any questions on this so far? So this idea now that we've taken the Mixolydian mode and we've used it over the A7, the D7, and the E7 chord, using the Dorian mode. All of those notes sounded good all the time. And now my other laptop and my phone are going off. I don't know what's going on. This is interrupt Justin during his live stream.
Can I come in with a question that's been sitting
Yes.
there from Paul Harvey for a bit?
Yeah.
It's going to tie in, I think, with what you're moving to.
Yeah.
It says, it looks like Dorian will fit particularly well over the 4 chord. Does it make more sense to switch to it to highlight the 4?
Okay. So that's a most astute question because it is exactly where we're about to go. So one of the great musical conundrums in the blues is that we play minor scales over major chords. So we're playing the minor pentatonic scale over A7, which is a major type chord, and over a D7 and an E7, which are all kind of major type chords. Dominant 7th chords are a major third with a flattened 7th added on the top. So we end up with this weird thing here on the A7 that we're playing the Dorian mode here, which has got this note, the C and the D, but our chord has this C sharp in it. No, Ziggy, you just have to wait. You wanted to come to the studio, you just have to wait. It's got this note in it, but we're playing the note either side, right? So the correct note to play really over the A7 would be all of those other notes, but let's change those C's to the C sharps. So if we took, here's our Dorian mode. Okay, let's just do it from A to A. So it'll be A, G, F sharp, E, D, C, B, A. Okay? If we wanted to make that correct, we'd move that minor note to the major note. So now we'd be playing A, G, F sharp, E, D, C sharp, B, A. I'm coming back to your point in just a second, Paul. This is all going to hopefully fall into place. So all we did was change that one note. The major third, the minor third, which was the note C, we changed it to a major third, which is the note C sharp. And we've ended up with the notes, we could go ascending. We ended up with A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A. Who knows what scale that is? Pop it in the comments here. Who knows what scale that would be? It's got, or what parent major scale it is. It's the notes are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, A. 2 sharps. What key has 2 sharps in it? Who's done a bit of practical music theory and they know what key has 2 sharps in it? It's not A. A major would have 3 sharps in it. D. Everyone say okay. So we're D major scale, but we're playing over the A. So let's try playing D major scale over an A and let's see what happens. Just because this is a nice example like the madness that we had before. Here we go, D major. Oh, I've got my whole blues on. Hang on. Let me just get an A back again. I need to clear my looper first quickly. Okay. Okay, here we go, D major scale. Okay, I played one duff note there on the way down as well, but you get the idea. It's like that D note is awful over the A, right? All of the notes are good, just stopping on the D, highlighting, thinking about D major scale, terrible idea. What we want to be doing is thinking about the A. The same idea. We're playing the D major scale over the A7 chord, but we're thinking A. And because we're thinking A, we're going to rename it A Mixolydian. An A Mixolydian is a really super hip scale to use over the A chord. And yes, Paul, I haven't forgotten your question. We're getting there just in a second. So now let me look at the same thing again. Just move my looper here where I can actually touch it with my foot instead of trying to do the splits. Now I'm going to try and play A Mixolydian and think in terms of A. And hopefully you'll notice something sounds kind of different. Hopefully better. Now, some of you will have already noticed, like, no, you weren't just playing the Mixolydian mode. You were using some other notes. Yeah. If you're playing the Mixolydian mode in A, you're thinking about A. You're playing a blues. So it would be really normal. In fact, it'd be weird not to use some of those blues phrases intertwined with the strict scale. Because if you play the scale really strictly, it either just sounds like kind of at this tempo, like a slow kind of weird jazz, but it doesn't sound musical. It's missing the missing the musicality. And what's really interesting as well with this, when you start thinking in terms of Mixolydian mode, is that you often use that minor third to the major third. So this little effect here, going, so we go, right? So we're still even using this note, but we're targeting this one. It's called framing, when you go one side, the other, or encapsulating that note. So things are suddenly starting to sound fairly musical again. instead of just thinking like the Mixolydian mode and practicing scales up and down, I got licks that I've learned. So I figured out fairly early doors for me, once I'd figured out what modes were and how they worked and where they'd go. Mostly I learnt that by learning to try, fumbling around on jazz tunes. But it gave me some understanding of moving harmony and changing the harmony, thinking about each chord that I'm on, which is where we're going now, and I'm going to get back to your question, Paul. So if in this sort of context here, I am playing the Mixolydian mode, but I'm much more thinking, I'm just thinking A7. I'm thinking bluesy licks, A7. I'm thinking major, A7. Because what you don't want to be doing is ripping these Mixolydian licks out on a minor blues, because that sounds really sour. Very, very, just a very displeasing kind of a sound. So I would encourage you, when you get into, if you want to start exploring some modes and checking out players that use this kind of stuff like Robben Ford and Larry Carlton, have a listen to what they're doing, but try and steal the concepts, the little licks, little bites that you can use. There are kind of technical exercises and intervallic harmonic ideas that you can explore, but I think you'll get more benefit, at least in the initial stages, by looking at licks that use these kind of concepts. So A7 is the 5 chord of D major scale. That's why we're using it. A7 is, there's only one dominant 7th chord in each key. It happens to fall on degree 5 of the scale. So if you're counting up like D, E, F, G, A. Okay, the 5 chord, the A, will be A7. So that's how you can figure out what the parent major scale is. So when we change chords to the D chord, to the D7 chord, if we want to play D Mixolydian, where are we? What's the parent major scale? Pop me in the comments. What's the parent major scale for D Mixolydian? Right, we've changed to the 4, and we want to go to, I'm seeing some good answers and a couple of wobbly ones. Just think about it. So D is the 5 chord of what key? If we have a D7, it's resolving to G. You got, okay, D7 resolves to G. So it's G major scale. So if we play a G major scale over a D7 chord, we're actually playing D Mixolydian. Weren't we doing that somewhere? Isn't that familiar? Ziggy, were we doing that before? Were we playing a G major scale over a D7 chord? I've got a feeling we were. Is that your favourite scale, Ziggy? You want to play Mixolydian mode over a D7. It's G major scale. So that's a funny little one, isn't it? So A Dorian mode, which we were saying sounds good over the whole blues, actually is the same as D Mixolydian when we play over the D. So all of that time when we were mucking around with the Dorian mode over the D7, over the 12-bar blues, when it hit the D7 chord, we were actually already playing D Mixolydian. How cool is that? So all of that time. Wow, let's try that out. Okay, let's do. Now, a really good way of practicing this and learning stuff is to do a vamp. And what I mean by a vamp is, instead of having the whole 12-bar blues, we might just stop on the D for a bit. So let's imagine we got a funky. So you get the idea. The advantage of doing vamps is that you end up really focusing on the D a lot more. If you're playing the Dorian mode, with this idea of playing the A Dorian mode over the whole 12-bar blues, it's easy to think of things in A all the time because you're thinking A Dorian. And we talked already a few times about how important it is to not think of the parent major scale. And thinking of the wrong mode is kind of the same thing as thinking of a different mode than the one you should be thinking about. So practicing playing... Ziggy, will you be quiet? So if you want to practice playing the D Mixolydian mode, I would encourage you to play over a vamp on just the D and really focus your attention on D, thinking about stopping on the note D or the note F sharp, targeting those chord tones and really kind of getting hip with it. And what I was just doing then was a little bit more funky, kind of slightly jazzy, I suppose, but that what I was doing was avoiding playing the classic blues licks instead. Right? So I was just really focused on it being notey rather than licky, if you understand that analogy. So when in a 12-bar blues, when it goes to the E chord, you want to do all of the same sort of stuff, just up 2 frets, right? So when it's going to E, you would change to E Mixolydian, and then D Mixolydian, then back to A Mixolydian. But remember as well, it is still a 12-bar blues. So a lot of people, when it gets to that 5 chord, if they don't want to outline that harmony so strongly, because sometimes you might not want to, it's okay to just blast back to the minor pentatonic and rip through the whole thing in minor pentatonic or Dorian mode or whatever you like. So there are those options where you do that. But again, something that can be good to practice is to be outlining the 2 different things. So an exercise I used to do, which I haven't done for a long time, hoping I'm not going to embarrass myself too much here, is moving between those 2 chords. Let's keep it in the key of A just so it makes sense. So if we go... Now, something I noticed that I'm doing there that made it feel kind of unnatural, I was deliberately trying to move the same shape down, which you might sometimes want to do. Let me go to the close-up and say, like, if on the E, you might go, and then on the D, that kind of thing. But I generally favor outlining the E and then hitting it at just a chord tone or a single note. I don't tend to do exactly the same lick moving it down a tone thing. Sometimes it works, and I wouldn't say I never do it, but it doesn't seem to be my musical taste. So I found it difficult then to deliberately try and show you that same motion. But it's a good thing to practice. Again, like just to make sure that your head is hip with this idea of moving the mode around, because that's the big picture end result thing that you want, is to be able to choose in the moment instinctively without thinking about it to move from playing A Mixolydian over the A, D Mixolydian over the D, and E Mixolydian over the E, mixing it in with minor pentatonic and blues scale and Dorian mode, where you just got this one key that overrides the whole thing, while you're still trying to explore a thread, while you're trying to find some interesting musical idea to explore. And that's not as easy as it... Well, actually, I guess it probably doesn't sound easy. I definitely didn't find that an easy thing. I still find with jazz, when I try and play any sort of more complicated forms where there's a lot of key changes, I find that the theory and the understanding-y kind of part can take over the musical idea part, which annoys me, and I fight it desperately hard. But it's because in jazz, when there's a lot of key changes, you have to be aware of where you are on the key. I find that that's so difficult to just ear it. There has to be, you have to practice it a ton, I think, before you get to that point where you don't even think about it anymore. Which is what I guess I've done for blues. I've done that a ton, and it's simpler. So that should happen for you a bit easier than it will if you wanted to get into playing giant steps or whatever, and not thinking too much about what was going on harmonically. That would be much more challenging. Miles got the old joke there. Mixolydian, Dorian, it's all Greek to me. Yes, we like that one. You know what they say about the old jokes? They are the oldest. So if you want to practice these things, I think vamps are a really good way to go. Like, as I just showed you on the D with a slightly funky thing, just picking a key, or if you're doing a blues in A, just do A7 for a while. Put a loop on for an A7 chord and explore playing A mixolydian, mixing it in with your blues things, and then do it to a D. Change to a D7, and then muck around on that for a little bit. Because I think that the truth of the matter is that you end up using all of those. If I'm playing on D mixolydian, I am going to be using kind of D blues kind of phrases as well, much more than you would if you were using the minor pentatonic scale. If you play A minor pentatonic over the A and then change to D and change to D minor pentatonic, it generally doesn't sound very nice. But if you're playing basing it around the mixolydian thing, you can seem to be able to sprinkle a few more of those ideas in without it starting to sound sour, which is, I think, an interesting thing. Okay. Let's take some questions if there are any. We've just got like 5 minutes left. I hope this was what I would hope that you'd get out of this is a practical bird's eye view of how you might want to go about learning modes, or why you wouldn't want to learn modes. Because I mean, like, I didn't learn modes to get into blues. I learned modes to get into jazz, which I think is fairly requisite. But the advantage of that was that when I got into more advanced blues players, I keep naming Larry and Robin just because they're my two favorite in that kind of sphere, I could understand a little bit more about what they were doing. When I'd listen to it and transcribe their sides of it, oh, he's using this kind of harmony here and he's doing that. So it was a byproduct. If I had have only wanted to play blues and I had have only wanted to play those things, I'm not sure I would have put in the hours to learn the modes as well. Right? So I think that you can play blues without the modes, but it was one of those questions about how to use modes in blues. It was something I get asked about fairly frequently. I know it's not a beginner's topic, and it's for a upper intermediate level guitar player, but I think it was worth dipping into, even for people who aren't ready for learning modes, who are still struggling with the blues a bit, because at least then you know what it is and why it might be useful and why it wouldn't be useful, and whether you're interested in learning it or not. I think that's pretty valuable. Anyway, okay, so any questions? Pop them in the chat. Or Richard, have we got any fun ones over there?
There's just one outstanding Q&A from Kenneth.
Okay.
Actually, this is relevant to discussions that have been happening in the community recently. So let's see your take on this one in context of what you're doing. Kenneth is asking, isn't it better to use 3 notes per string instead of caged as soon as we use 7-note scales? Caged is okay for the major and minor pentatonics, or...
So is the debate whether we should use caged or whether we should use 3-note string?
When you're doing this modes business.
Okay. So this is a really big and hotly debated topic, but I have a fairly definitive answer, which is hard to rebuff, and that is they are both useful depending on the circumstance. So I think that they're both really important to learn. I think it's much, 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 much more important to learn the 5 patterns first, because the 5 patterns are relative to the 5 chord shapes. And the cage system isn't like a system that someone invented. It is just how it is. There happen to be 5 guitar shapes of the guitar that are bred from the tuning of the instrument. And so it's not disputable that there are 5 major scale chord shapes, and therefore having major scale patterns that fit around the chord shapes, I think, is really, really useful and important, because it allows you to target different chord tones within the scale shape. It gives you a clear indication of a framework. And for me personally, I think most of the professional guitar players I know tend to think in those kind of chord shapes, so that the licks that we learn and the scales and the arpeggios and everything else are based around the chord shapes that we choose to learn. Where the 3-note per string system really comes into its own is if you want to do any of that fast legato like Joe Satriani things, or Steve Vai, or whatever those legato techniques. 3-note per string is super helpful because it's consistent. Because there's 3 notes on every string, you can do pick, hammer, hammer, pick, hammer, hammer, or make up little technical sequences, melodic sequences that you can then apply to it, and it works on every scale pattern because it's symmetrical. Well, not symmetrical, that's not the right word. Because there's 3 notes on every string in every pattern, any pattern that you make has the same kind of fingering order of events. I don't know what the word is to describe that. So 3-note per string definitely has value, but I don't feel like it's a good first one, because you're continually moving away from the notes that you might want to choose. I'm going to give you just a couple of quick examples of this. So if anyone's not familiar with it, this would be G major scale pattern 1. Now, it fits perfectly around this chord shape. So if I'm playing over a G major chord, I can see it sits nicely around here. Whereas if I was looking at pattern 1 here, a 3-note per string, now I'm already away from my thing here, and I'm having to think of this G. So I'd have to move from thinking about this G. There's the 5th, there's the octave, there's the 3rd, but now, well, now I'm thinking of this. I'm having to think of this new shape, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That said, the consistency of being able to do anything like that is fantastic. When we get into pattern 2, you can see we're staying in the same kind of area of the guitar neck. And it's essentially pattern 2 in the major scale. This is all the same as the 3-note per string, but instead of having just those 2 notes and going here to stay in pattern, it's extending down. So 3-note per string patterns are great for the technical thing, and they're great for linking the different patterns. I don't think they're a good first stop. And I don't know if you guys will know, there's a rock guitar player called Martin Goulding, who's a fantastically technical rock guitar player. Mostly, I would assume he plays 3-note per string patterns when he's doing, when he's shredding. But even he says that having a framework of the 5 patterns and understanding the cage system and how everything fits together is of primary importance. Because no matter what you want to do technically, you need to know where you are, and you need to understand the function of the notes that you play. And this is where things, I feel pretty strongly, that the function of the notes, whether you do it by ear, whether you play the note and you hear the function of the note, or whether you do it visually, the understanding the function of the notes is really important. I would assume if somebody learned 3-note per string first and paid attention to the function of the notes, particularly audibly, like listen to the function of the notes, that it would probably be great. And there are certainly guitar players around that base their whole playing around 3-note per string and think the cage system sucks, and they're fantastic guitar players and great musicians. So I'm not trying to poo-poo on anyone else's thinking. This is just my opinion. I feel strongly that understanding the note function in the cage system should be the most important part. And if you get that down first, then using the 3-note per string patterns to link them all together is really helpful. That's yeah, that's my take on that. So yeah, but it's like there are, I've had great arguments about this stuff as well with people whose opinions I really respect, and there are definitely good arguments the other way, but I don't think they didn't work for me. And there's another system as well which is worth checking out if you want to get really into it. If you're a 3 note per string guy, having a look at the Berkeley system as well, which is kind of 3 note per string in some patterns, but also 2 notes on some patterns, but are different to the standard conventional caged patterns. They put notes in different places, which can be. I did the Berkeley book as a reading exercise, but I found their scale shapes super interesting. So anyway, there we go. I think we're about done on modes and the blues. It's going to be about time for me to read my daughter a story if she hasn't already gone to bed, which she should have done, but she might have been pulling I'm waiting for Daddy to finish his internet thing so he can read me a story. We're reading the Roald Dahl book, the biography called Going Solo. I would highly recommend it. Nothing to do with music, but it's just a really interesting read. Roald Dahl, the author of The Twits and all of these fantastic books, had a most absolutely fascinating life. So he's got 2 books out. One's called Boy, which is his childhood, and the other one is Going Solo, which is about his time as a fighter pilot in World War II. It's just like, it's mad, the life he's had. I definitely recommend it. Nothing to do with guitar. Anyway, so hopefully that makes sense. I think that you get a little questionnaire quiz thing at the end of this automatically. At least there used to be. I'm not sure if that's still happening. If there is, if you've got any questions or there's things you still don't understand about this concept, or things about that I said that were really helpful, then let me know, because it's kind of good for me to go like, oh yeah, those things that I said that really helped, or that was, I don't want to. I'm hoping that I didn't just throw loads of ink in the water and now you're even more confused than you were. So feedback, positive and negative, and questions that you got, always really helpful, improve my teaching game and all of that. So I think we're there. Yes, the class is ending, iPhone. That's good name, iPhone. Does my child have a full name yet? No, the younger child has just still a letter. He's just M for now. I've got a daughter called Vivi, who is the one I've got to go and read to. My son is only 6 weeks old or 7 weeks old or something, so he's yeah. Anyways, he doesn't need stories yet. Just boobs and nappies and sleep. So have a fantastic rest of your evening or afternoon if you happen to be stateside. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Big thank you, Richard, for helping out with the moderation. And yeah, I can't remember when the next one is. I haven't got my little notepad here, but I'm sure if you've signed up for it, you'll get an email. And hopefully I'll get an email too, letting me know when I'm supposed to be doing stuff. Loads more fun things coming up. I'm still working like crazy on the Blues Immersion course. I'll be filming for that a whole bunch of stuff next week and the week after. It's progressing really well. I can't wait to actually let that out in the wild, because I really feel like it's some of my best work and my best breaking down of complex things into usable bits of knowledge. So anyways, have yourself a fantastic day, and I'll see you for plenty more very soon. Ciao, ciao.